My daughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, you're too ugly to attend my wedding. You'll embarrass me." I froze, my scarred hands gripping the dented steel lunch pail that had fed us both for years. She sneered at it, too. "Don't bring that thing either." The words cut deeper than any injury I ever took in the mill. It wasn't always this way with her. There was a time when my daughter thought the sun rose and set with me. I can still remember her little fingers tugging at my calloused hand, her voice chirping, "Daddy, come see," whenever she built something with blocks or drew a picture. Back then, my scars weren't ugly to her. They were trophies, proof that her father worked hard, that he didn't give up. After Marjorie passed, she was all I had. I didn't know how to braid hair or pack a school lunch just right, but I learned. I burned pancakes more times than I'd admit, but she'd laugh and say, "That's okay, Dad. I like them crispy." She was the reason I woke up every morning and walked down to the steel mill with my dented lunch pail swinging at my side. That pail was my companion through decades of labor. I carried more than food in it. Inside were folded notes she scribbled in crayon, "Good luck, Daddy," or "I love you." Sometimes I'd open it at lunchtime, sit on the factory bench, and those words would feed me more than the sandwich ever could. I still remember one afternoon when she was about 8. I had come straight from work to her school recital, still in my greasy overalls. I sat in the back so the other parents wouldn't complain about the smell of steel and sweat. When her part ended, she marched right over to me, beaming. She held up my hand, scarred and rough, in front of her friends and said proudly, "My dad's hands built my world." I nearly cried right there. I thought to myself, if Marjorie could see us, she'd be proud. That one line stayed with me through years of double shifts and lonely nights. I never imagined that one day those same hands would be called ugly and unwanted. Our routines were simple but steady. Mornings began with me clanging that pail onto the counter while she got ready for school. Sometimes she'd slip a cookie into it with a little sticky note that said, "For later." Evenings, I'd come home and place the pail on the table. She'd run to check if I'd brought her anything back, a candy bar, a keychain, even a shiny bolt I found at work. To her, everything I gave her was treasure. Sundays were sacred. We didn't have much money, but we always had time for pancakes. I'd mix the batter in an old bowl, she'd stir it too fast and spill flour everywhere, and we'd laugh until our stomachs hurt. Later, we'd sit on the porch, she with her orange juice and me with my coffee, and she'd lean against my shoulder. Those were the moments I lived for. There were hard days too, of course. Nights when I came home so tired I could barely stand, or mornings when I had to choose between paying a bill and buying her new shoes. But she never complained. She'd hug me and say, "We're fine, Dad. We've got each other." And that was enough for me. When she entered high school, I noticed small changes. She became more careful about how she looked, how she spoke, how she acted around others. That's normal, I told myself, it's just teenage years. She still smiled at me, still slipped the occasional note into my pail, though the handwriting was neater now, the words shorter. "Good day, Dad." Or just, "Love you." At her graduation, I stood in the crowd, my pail resting on my lap like a badge of honor. When her name was called, I cheered so loud my throat ached. She laughed and waved at me from the stage. For a moment, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Looking back, maybe that was the last time she looked at me with pure pride. After that, life moved fast. College applications, new friends, city trips. She was growing into her own person. I tried to keep up, to stay involved, but I could feel the distance slowly stretching between us. Still, I believed the bond we shared was unbreakable. I had given everything, my youth, my health, my sleep, my strength, to give her a future. I told myself, even if the world turns its back, she never will. I didn't see the cracks forming, not really. Or maybe I did, but I chose not to. When she stopped asking me to pick her up from events, I thought it was independence. When she avoided introducing me to new friends, I thought it was teenage privacy. When she brushed away my stories of the mill, I thought it was boredom. I didn't know it was shame. Now, holding the pail today, I can still feel the ghosts of her crayon notes pressed into the metal, little indentations where her tiny hands had once scribbled love. It's funny how something so simple, a battered old steel container, can hold the best and worst of a man's life. Back then, it was our bond. Soon, it would become the very thing she wanted hidden. The thought aches like an open wound. Because when I look at that pail, I don't just see rust and dents. I see Marjorie's smile when she first packed it for me. I see my daughter's little face pressed against the kitchen window, waiting for me to come home. I see long shifts, long nights, sacrifices no one else noticed. And yet, I also see the photo inside, the corner bent, the edges curling. Just like our bond, quietly fraying. Cliffhanger, foreshadow, one evening, as I closed the pail after dinner, the photo slipped slightly out of its place, hanging crooked. I straightened it without thinking. But something in me wondered if this was the first small tear in the fabric of what we once were. The first time she flinched when I hugged her in front of her friends, I told myself it was nothing. Teenagers, I thought, they grow shy, worried about appearances. I'd seen it before with other parents. But something about the quick way she pulled back, as if my touch might leave a mark, cut deeper than I expected. That night, as I set my steel lunch pail on the table, I stared at it for a long time. The dents, the rust, the scratches, every scar on it told a story. But maybe, to her, it told the wrong story now. The whispers started slowly, like drafts sneaking under a door. I'd walk her to a cafe, wanting to buy her a milkshake like we used to, and I'd notice the sideways glances from her friends. One whispered, not quietly enough, "Is that her dad? He looks rough." My daughter's face went red. She laughed it off, but she didn't look at me. At work, some of the younger wives of my coworkers began to look at me strangely, too. One asked casually, "So, will you be attending the big wedding?" But the way she said it, the slight curve of her lip, told me she already knew I wasn't welcome. Word spreads fast in a town like ours. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by her apartment to drop off a casserole. She opened the door just enough to take it, then glanced down at the lunch pail in my hand. "Dad, maybe don't carry that everywhere," she muttered, almost too low for me to hear. "It's not exactly stylish." It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it, like the pail wasn't just old, but embarrassing. Like I was embarrassing. Inside, I sat quietly on her couch while she bustled around, pretending to be busy. Her fiancé came out, slick smile on his face, and looked me up and down. "Tough day at the factory, sir?" he asked. The way he said, "sir," didn't sound like respect. It sounded like mockery. My daughter chuckled softly at his joke, not realizing, or maybe realizing all too well, how sharp it felt to me. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. Instead, I ran my thumb along the lunch pail's dented edge, grounding myself in silence. Later that week, I attended a small gathering at her request, just a casual dinner with some of her friends. I thought it was a chance to bond, to feel included. But when I arrived, I noticed she barely introduced me. "This is my dad," she said, waving a hand vaguely in my direction. Just my dad. No stories of how I raised her alone, no proud smile. Just my dad. The conversations flowed around me like water around a rock. Nobody asked me a thing. They talked about promotions, trips, expensive wines. I tried once, telling a funny story about the mill, but the moment I said the word factory, silence dropped on the table like a lead weight. Then, someone quickly changed the subject. I laughed softly to myself, but inside I was shrinking. For the first time, I realized, maybe she was ashamed. When the night ended, I walked home under the streetlights, the pail heavy in my hand though it was empty. I kept hearing that phrase, just my dad. The next morning at the grocery store, I overheard two neighbors whispering. I heard he's not even invited. Can you blame her? He's so outdated. I turned down another aisle before they saw me. Outdated. Like an old tool, once useful, now just clutter. I tried brushing it all aside. I told myself she was under pressure, trying to fit in with her fiancé's circle, with the polished world she thought she belonged to. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder in my head, even when people weren't talking. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the lunch pail again. I opened it, half expecting to see one of her notes tucked inside, even though I knew there hadn't been one in years. Instead, I saw only the old photo of Marjorie and me, the corner bent, the colors fading. For a moment, I held it up and looked at my own reflection in the pail's metal. It was warped, stretched, distorted. I hardly recognized the man staring back. Maybe she didn't either. I shut it hard, the clang echoing through the empty house. For the first time, I wondered if the whispers were right. Maybe I didn't belong in her new world. Maybe I was becoming nothing more than a shadow she wanted to forget. That night, as I turned off the kitchen light, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the pail's dented steel. The face staring back at me wasn't proud anymore, it was tired, uncertain, already fading. She gave me the invitation like it was a duty, not a joy. I'll never forget the way she held it between her fingers, as if it might stain her nails if she touched it too long. Here, she said quickly, sliding the envelope across my kitchen table. It's formalities. Formalities. That word hit me like a blow. A father's presence at his daughter's wedding was supposed to be more than that. It was supposed to be sacred. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear it. The card was elegant, white with gold trim, her name and his written in a script so fancy it looked more like art than letters. But as I read the words, I realized something was missing. There was no mention of me walking her down the aisle. Not even a hint of it. I looked up, confused. Do you want me to give you away? Her eyes flickered to the side. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Dad, let's not make this complicated. His father's going to do that. It just makes more sense. I felt something inside me crumble. Marjorie and I had dreamed of that moment, her in a white dress, me on her arm, proud as ever. It was the picture that got me through double shifts and lonely nights. And now it was gone, handed to another man like I never existed. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod. If that's what you want, I said softly. She smiled faintly, relieved that I didn't argue. But inside, I was screaming. The real breaking point came at the engagement brunch a week later. It was held at a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd never set foot in before. I wore my best jacket, the same one I'd worn to her graduation, and polished my shoes until they almost shone. I brought the steel lunch pail with me, tucked under my arm. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or maybe because it felt like a piece of armor, something familiar in a world that no longer wanted me. When I arrived, the hostess greeted me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze dropped to the pail. Sir, we don't allow personal items in the dining area. Perhaps you could leave that outside? Personal item. To me, it was life. To her, it was clutter. Reluctantly, I set it down by the coat rack. The clang it made on the tile floor turned a few heads. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Inside, the tables were crowded with his family and her friends. Laughter and conversation buzzed like static. She waved me over but didn't stand to greet me. When I reached the table, I realized there was no place card with my name. Instead, a chair had been pulled from another table and set off to the side. "Right here, Dad," she said casually, as though shoving me into the corner was perfectly natural. I sat quietly, my jacket bunching against the back wall. I tried to smile, to join in, but no one asked me anything. Not about my work, not about my life, not even about her childhood. It was as if I didn't exist. At one point, the groom's father began telling a story about his days in business, about how he'd built an empire from scratch. The table roared with admiration. My daughter's eyes sparkled as she listened, hanging on every word. I wanted to say, I built something too. I built her future. With these hands. But I didn't. I just sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, scarred knuckles pressing into my skin. When the dessert came, someone at the far end of the table leaned close to whisper, but not quietly enough. "He doesn't really fit in here, does he?" A ripple of laughter followed. My daughter's lips twitched like she wanted to shush them, but she didn't. She just lowered her eyes and let the moment pass. That silence hurt worse than the words. After the plates were cleared, I excused myself and went to retrieve my lunch pail from the coat rack. For a moment, I thought about just leaving. Walking out the door and never looking back. But when I picked up the pail, I noticed the small photo inside had slipped again, hanging crooked. I straightened it carefully, though my hands trembled. I stepped outside and stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool evening air. Behind me, laughter spilled out of the restaurant, muffled by the glass doors. My daughter's voice rose above the others, light and carefree, as if I'd never been there at all. For the first time, I felt invisible in her world. Not just unwanted, but erased. As I walked away, a young man from the restaurant staff passed me and chuckled, mimicking my slow gait. His laughter echoed down the street. I glanced back through the window, hoping, praying, that she would defend me. But she didn't. She just kept laughing with the others, as if I were already gone. It wasn't just shame. It was money. I found that out by accident one evening. I had stopped by her apartment unannounced, carrying the lunch pail under my arm with a casserole inside. Old habits die hard, I suppose. She wasn't home yet, but her car was out front, so I sat on the porch to wait. That's when I heard voices drifting through the open kitchen window, hers and his. At first, I smiled, happy just to hear her laugh. But then his words sharpened into focus. "We need the house money, babe. Once your dad's gone, that place will set us up for good." My stomach dropped. "Shoo," she hissed. "Don't say it like that. He'll help us now, too. He just doesn't know it yet. If he shows up at the wedding, people will expect him to contribute. He'll look cheap if he doesn't." There was a pause, then her voice softened in that pleading way she used to get candy from me as a child. I just don't want him to embarrass us, you know? We need this to look perfect." Embarrass. That word again. Only now, it wasn't just my looks, it was my wallet, my house, my life's work. I sat frozen on the porch, gripping the handle of my steel pail so tightly my knuckles turned white. Inside it, the casserole was still warm, wrapped in a towel the way Marjorie used to do. For years, that pail had carried food, notes, little treasures of love. Now, it carried the weight of betrayal. I thought of Marjorie then, her soft voice telling me, always protect her, no matter what. I had given everything, broken my back, swallowed pride, all to keep that promise. But what if protecting her now meant protecting her from herself? I slipped away quietly, unnoticed. At home, I set the pail on the table and opened it with trembling hands. The casserole sat untouched, but I wasn't looking at food anymore. I was looking at a vessel that could carry truth. That night, I placed a small digital recorder inside. It was an old thing, given to me by a buddy at the mill who once thought I'd dictate my memoirs. I never used it for stories. But now, it had a new purpose. The next time I visited her, I carried the pail as always. She barely looked at it, dismissing it as part of my old man routine. But inside, it was capturing her words, his words, the conversations they never imagined I'd keep. I didn't like doing it. It made me feel like a spy in my own family. But what choice did I have? Her love had become a transaction, her respect a debt. One recording in particular still haunts me. They were discussing honeymoon plans. He laughed and said, "Once your dad signs the check, we'll be set." And she replied, with a tone I couldn't recognize, "He owes me that much. After all, I've put up with him this long." Put up with me. My own daughter. I replayed that clip over and over, the words searing into my ears until I couldn't listen anymore. I placed the recorder back in the pail, closed the lid, and let the clang echo through my empty kitchen. For years, that sound had meant supper, laughter, home. Now it sounded like a gavel in a courtroom. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had gotten here. Was it something I did wrong? Did I smother her with too much love? Did I not prepare her for the real world? Or was it simply that the real world taught her things I couldn't protect her from, vanity, greed, shame? The memories of her childhood swirled in my mind. Her tiny arms hugging my neck. Her voice saying, "My dad's hands built my world." How quickly that pride had turned into something else. Something cold. One evening, I opened the pail and found one of her old notes at the bottom, crumpled, yellowed with age. I must have overlooked it all these years. It said, in her uneven child's handwriting, "Good luck, Daddy. I love you." I pressed it against my chest and wept like I hadn't since Marjorie's funeral. The betrayal wasn't just in what she wanted, it was in what she had forgotten. But slowly, as the days passed, my grief hardened into resolve. If she and her fiancé saw me as nothing more than a source of money, then they didn't deserve to benefit from all I had worked for. I might not be able to change her heart, but I could protect what was left of my dignity. The lunch pail, once a symbol of nourishment and care, had become something else now. It was my vault, my safeguard. It carried not just food, but truth. Proof. Evidence. I didn't know exactly how I'd use it yet. But I knew this, I wouldn't let her or anyone else strip me of the last thing I had, my honor. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. That night, as I closed the pail, the latch snapped shut with a sharp metallic click. It no longer sounded like supper. It sounded like judgment. When I finally asked her why she was ashamed of me, she didn't flinch. We were sitting in her living room, the smell of scented candles clinging to the air, her fiancé lounging on the couch with that smug grin he always wore. I had carried my steel lunch pail with me, half habit, half defiance. I cleared my throat and said quietly, "Why, sweetheart? Why are you so ashamed of your old man?" She looked at me like I'd just said something ridiculous. "Dad, you're being dramatic. Nobody's ashamed." Her fiancé chuckled. "Come on, sir, don't be so sensitive. Weddings are about appearances. We just want everything, polished." Polished. That word stung. I thought of the grease under my nails, the scars on my hands, the dents in my pail. Unpolished. That's what I was to them. I pressed again, my voice firmer. "You don't want me at your wedding. You don't want me walking you down the aisle. You've said it in so many words. Tell me the truth." She sighed, exasperated, like a teenager tired of her father's questions. "Dad, you wouldn't understand. Times are different now. You just don't fit the image. Can't you just let this be?" Her fiancé smirked and added, "You'll still be around for holidays, right? That's what matters." I wanted to shout, to remind her of all the nights I sat up with her when she had fevers, of all the meals I skipped so she could eat. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do was reach down and touch the cool steel of the pail by my side, grounding myself. Later that week, I went to see a lawyer. A friend from the mill had recommended him years ago for writing wills. I'd been putting it off, always believing I had time. But now, time felt short. I walked into his office with the pail under my arm. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. When I opened it on his desk and began pulling out papers, deed copies, bank statements, the small digital recorder, his expression grew serious. I told him everything. About the insults, the whispers, the scheme for my house. He listened quietly, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You've already got proof. If they contest, we can let the whole town hear their words." I nodded slowly, my throat tight. The idea of exposing her tore at me, but so did the thought of being used like a tool until I was empty. The lawyer drafted the changes. A no-contest clause, airtight. If she or anyone tried to fight it, everything would bypass them and go straight into a scholarship fund in Marjorie's name. It was both justice and punishment, love for the community, but a firm stand against disrespect. Word must have leaked, because soon after, whispers grew louder in town. At the grocery store, at church, even at the diner, people looked at me differently. Some nodded with quiet respect. Others shook their heads, muttering that I was being cruel to my own blood. I heard one woman whisper, "Can you believe it? Cutting his own daughter out?" Another replied, "Well, maybe she deserves it." I heard what she said. The truth was leaking like water through cracks. At night, I sat at my kitchen table with the pail in front of me. It was heavier now, stuffed with documents, recordings, sealed envelopes. Not food anymore, not notes from a child, evidence. Protection. One evening, my neighbor Frank stopped by. He'd known me since my mill days, a gruff man with a soft heart. He noticed the pail on the table and asked what was inside. I hesitated, then opened it. He whistled low when he saw the papers. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "Don't let them take you for a fool." I looked at him, unsure. "She's my daughter, Frank. My only one." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes love means drawing a line. If she can't respect you, she shouldn't profit from you either." His words echoed long after he left. That night, I opened the recorder again, playing back her voice, the fiancé's voice, talking about me like I was already gone. Each word carved deeper into me, but each word also steeled my resolve. The lunch pail sat on the table, its lid open, documents spilling out like guts. For years, it had carried nourishment. Now, it carried the truth, the kind that could destroy or protect. I closed it gently, the latch snapping shut. The sound didn't remind me of supper anymore. It reminded me of a courtroom, of judgment waiting just ahead. The lawyer's words came back to me, sharp and final: "If they contest, we can let the whole town hear." If love meant financing disrespect, it wasn't love. That's what I told myself as I sat once again in the lawyer's office, the steel lunch pail heavy in my lap. For decades, that pail had carried sandwiches, apples, and little notes from my daughter. Now it carried bank records, deeds, and recordings, every scrap of evidence that proved I was more than just an old man to be discarded. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, adjusted his glasses as he slid the fresh draft of the will across the desk toward me. His office smelled of old books and coffee, and the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. "You understand what this means?" he asked gently. "She'll get nothing if she contests. Everything will go directly into the scholarship fund in your wife's name." I nodded slowly. My throat was dry, but my resolve was firm. If she can't respect me while I'm alive, she won't profit from me when I'm gone. He leaned back, studying me. Most fathers, they hesitate at this point. "Are you sure?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the pail and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was one of the notes my daughter had written me when she was small. The edges were yellowed, the crayon letters uneven. "Good luck, Daddy. I love you." I laid it beside the will. My voice trembled. She used to believe in me. She used to be proud of these hands. I held them up, scarred and worn. Now she looks at me like I'm shameful. Like I'm a burden. If Marjorie were here, she wouldn't let me be used like this. She'd tell me to protect what we built. The lawyer nodded. Then let's finalize this. We worked through the details, signatures, witnesses, seals. With every line I signed, I felt both grief and strength intertwine. It wasn't easy, cutting my only child from what she once called our family home. But it was necessary. I asked for one more clause, one that Peterson raised an eyebrow at. If she, or anyone, tries to contest, everything goes to charity. Not just the house, not just the money. Everything. He leaned forward. That's ironclad. You really want to do that? I nodded. Yes. If she sees my life as nothing more than a down payment, then she'll get nothing but ashes. He pressed the notary stamp against the papers with a heavy thud, the sound echoing like finality. Then he handed me a small sticker seal and said, "Some clients like to mark their personal copies. For peace of mind." I opened the lunch pail and pressed the seal inside the lid, right above the spot where Marjorie once taped a photo of herself when I started at the mill. It felt like a strange kind of symmetry, her watching over this decision, the final safeguard. Before I left, Peterson looked at me carefully. "Do you want her to know now?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until she forces my hand." As I walked out of the office, the pail clanged softly at my side with every step. People on the sidewalk glanced at it the way they always did, some curious, some dismissive. But none of them knew that inside was the weight of my life, proof, punishment, and protection all at once. At home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the freshly signed documents. My daughter's face flashed in my mind, her as a child, laughing on the porch with pancake batter on her cheeks, and her as an adult, rolling her eyes at me, asking me not to bring the pail around. The contrast broke me. So I wrote her a letter. It wasn't long, just a page, but every word came from the marrow of my bones. I told her I loved her. That everything I had ever done was for her. But I also told her that love wasn't a blank check. That dignity mattered. That respect mattered. And that if she couldn't offer me that, then she would not inherit a single thing I built with my sweat. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it beneath the thermos inside the pail. Someday, I thought, she might read it. Maybe it would break her. Maybe it would wake her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Marjorie. I imagined her standing at the sink, drying her hands on a towel, giving me that small nod she used to give when she approved of something I'd done. I wanted to believe she would have approved of this. The next morning, as the sun broke over the rooftops, I carried the pail outside and sat on the porch. The metal felt warm already from the rising heat. I ran my hand over the dents, each one earned through years of labor. I thought of all it had held, meals, notes, now secrets. And I realized something, it wasn't just a pail anymore. It was my vault, my weapon, my testimony. Neighbors passed by and waved. Some gave me knowing looks, whispers still circling from the leak about the will. I didn't wave back. My hand rested firmly on the pail, steadying me. I wasn't done yet. Before going back inside, I glanced at the letter hidden beneath the thermos. It sat there quietly, waiting, like a loaded chamber. One day, it would be opened. And when it was, everything would change. A new family photo arrived in the mail, glossy and staged, smiling faces lined up like a magazine spread. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that maybe my copy had been misprinted. But no. There she was in her white rehearsal dress, her fiancé beside her, his parents flanking them proudly. And where I should have been, where a father should stand, was another man. His father. They had posed him in my place, his hand on her shoulder, his smile wide and confident. My chest tightened as I stared at it. I had been erased, replaced as though I had never existed. I set the photo down on the table, then reached for my steel lunch pail. My fingers brushed over its dented surface, the scratches, the rust. I remembered every evening I had set it on the table after work, and how she used to run to check inside for little treats or notes. Now, she wanted it gone, just like me. That evening, a text arrived from her. Short. Polite. Cold. Dad, we've been talking. It's probably best if you don't attend the wedding. No hard feelings. We'll send you photos. Photos. As though a photograph could replace a father's presence. I called her. My hand shook as I held the phone. When she picked up, her voice was brisk, almost rehearsed. Dad, please don't make this harder. You know how important appearances are. People talk. We just want everything perfect. Perfect without me? I asked, my voice cracking despite my effort to keep it steady. There was silence on the line. Then she said softly, maybe later. We'll find another time to celebrate, just us. Okay? Her voice cracked just enough for me to hear it, doubt. For the first time, hesitation slipped through her polished tone. A tiny crack in her armor. But it wasn't enough. After we hung up, I sat for a long time with the lunch pail on my lap. I turned it over in my hands, staring at the dents, the scars, the marks of years of labor. And for the first time in my life, I polished it. I rubbed the metal until the dull gray began to shine faintly, until I could see my reflection in its warped surface. I wasn't polishing it for pride. I was polishing it for battle. The pail had been my companion, my vault, my proof. Now it was my armor. If they wanted me gone, I would walk into that wedding with it gleaming at my side. Not to beg for a place, but to show them I was not ashamed. That night, I scrolled through the gift registry she had shared online. There were the usual things, dishes, towels, gadgets. But then I saw it, down payment fund. Guests were encouraged to donate toward their dream home. My stomach turned. That dream home was meant to be built on my ashes, on the house Marjorie and I had poured our lives into. They wanted me erased from the wedding, erased from the photos, and yet they still wanted my sweat, my sacrifice, my bricks and beams. I closed the laptop and pulled the pail closer. Inside, the letter I had written to her rested beneath the thermos. Above it, the recordings, the will copies, the deeds, all waiting. The weight of it in my lap felt heavier than ever, like I was carrying judgment itself. The next morning, I walked through town with the pail in my hand. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Some sympathetic, some cruel. There he goes, the old man who cut his daughter out. Others, softer, good for him. About time someone stood up. I kept walking, my grip tight on the handle. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, steady and certain. At the diner, Frank slid into the booth across from me. He looked at the polished pail and raised an eyebrow. Looks different. It is, I said simply. He nodded. What's next? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I tapped the lid of the pail. I think it's time they see what's inside. Frank leaned back, studying me. Then he gave a slow nod. Make sure you do it on your terms. Not theirs. That night, I laid the pail on the table and opened it one last time. The documents, the recordings, the sealed will, they glinted under the kitchen light like weapons sharpened for battle. I closed the lid gently, my reflection staring back from the polished surface. On the counter beside it lay the wedding invitation, her handwriting scrawled across the envelope. I set the pail next to it, steel against paper, and for the first time, I felt ready. The next time she saw me, it would not be as the man she wanted hidden. It would be as the father she could never erase. When I walked into the wedding hall, the music didn't stop, but the whispers did. The place was dressed like a fairy tale. Chandeliers glowed golden, white roses curled around ivory pillars, and soft violin music floated through the air. Every guest wore their finest, all smiles and champagne flutes. But when I stepped through the doors, alone and unannounced, the smiles cracked like old paint. I wasn't wearing a suit. I wore the same jacket I'd worn to her graduation, the one she once said made me look strong and safe. In my left hand, polished and gleaming, I carried the steel lunch pail. Not hidden. Not tucked under my arm. I carried it like a flag. Heads turned. Some guests murmured. One woman leaned into her husband's ear, eyes wide with recognition. I saw her before she saw me. My daughter stood near the altar, bouquet in hand, laughing at something her fiancé whispered. Her dress shimmered, her hair pinned just like her mother's had been on our wedding day. She looked beautiful, until she looked at me. The moment her eyes met mine, the color drained from her face. She took a step forward, her voice shaking. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I walked slowly down the aisle, the pail swinging gently at my side, its latch clinking like a clock ticking toward truth. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I said calmly. "I'm here to give a gift." A ripple of tension spread through the room. Her fiancé stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her arm. "Sir, this isn't the time." I stopped beside the gift table and set the lunch pail down with a deliberate clang. The sound echoed through the room like a gavel strike. "You told me I didn't belong," I said, locking eyes with her. "That I was too ugly, too old, too embarrassing. But I came anyway, not for applause, not for forgiveness. Just the truth." I opened the pail slowly. Inside were neatly stacked documents, the will, the deed, the recordings. I pulled out a small portable speaker and pressed play. Her voice filled the air. "Once your dad's gone, that place will set us up for good. He owes me that much. After all, I've put up with him this long." Gasps spread through the crowd. Her face went pale. The fiancé stiffened beside her, his jaw tight. "Stop it," she hissed, eyes darting. "Turn it off." I did. One clip was enough. I didn't need to embarrass her further. That wasn't my goal. "I came here to say goodbye," I said quietly. "Not to you, but to the man who stayed silent. The man who let his daughter erase him. That man's done." Murmurs broke out. One older guest near the back muttered, "Good for him." Another said, "So that's what happened." I turned to the guests. "There will be no inheritance. No house. No trust fund. If anyone contests my will, everything goes to charity. Marjorie's Trades Fellowship will fund hard-working kids who don't look down on where they came from." I looked at my daughter one last time. Her lip quivered, but her eyes burned, not with sorrow, but shame. I wondered, just for a second, if she might say something. If she'd cry or run to me or apologize. But she stood frozen, bouquet trembling in her hand. I picked up the pail, now empty of its secrets, and nodded toward her. "You used to say these hands built your world. Now, they've built something else, a future that doesn't need your permission." I turned and walked back down the aisle. No one stopped me. But behind me, slow and hesitant at first, a sound began, clapping. A single pair of hands. Then another. Then more. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The lunch pail swung at my side, lighter than it had felt in years. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true-life stories. As I stepped out into the sunlight, the heavy doors closing behind me, I caught my reflection in the pail's polished surface. I didn't look broken. I looked free. The house didn't echo, it breathed. After the wedding, I came home and placed the lunch pail gently on the kitchen table, right where it had always sat after every shift. But this time, there was no clang. Just quiet. No calls came that night. No messages. Not even from her. Outside, the town buzzed. At the post office, I heard my name being whispered behind hands. At the gas station, someone clapped me on the shoulder and muttered, "Took guts." At church, the pastor made a vague sermon about respecting the pillars that raised us. But inside these walls, silence. I spent most of those days walking. Not aimlessly, but with purpose. I followed the river trails Marjorie and I used to walk together when we were young. Her laughter echoed in my memory as I passed the old willow tree where we carved our initials. M+E. Faded now, but still there. She would have been proud of what I did. I know that now. And yet, there was grief. Not just for the loss of a daughter's love, but for the love I once believed was unbreakable. It's a strange thing, mourning someone who's still alive. The old neighbors dropped by less and less. Some didn't know what to say. Others thought I'd gone too far. But a few, just a few, came quietly, brought casseroles, nodded without words. Those meant the most. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, lunch pail in my lap, sunlight glinting off the polished lid. I remembered when she used to sit beside me with her orange juice, asking me silly questions about stars and clouds. I remembered when she called me a hero. That little girl was gone. But so was the man who would have let her walk all over him. Inside the house, I started clearing out the storage room. Not out of anger, but with something new stirring in me, purpose. There were dozens of old tools still in decent shape, old handbooks from the mill, even Marjorie's baking pans collecting dust in a cabinet. I found her old apron tucked behind a box of holiday lights. I pressed it to my face and closed my eyes. I wasn't alone. Not truly. Not while her spirit lingered in every corner of this house. Later that week, a grandchild from a distant cousin came by. Barely a teenager. His mom had heard the rumors. She said her son had trouble focusing, didn't know what to do with his hands. I invited him to help me fix the gate. Just a simple latch job. But when we finished, the boy's face lit up like he'd built a skyscraper. He looked at me and said, "I didn't think I could do something like that." I smiled and handed him a root beer. You'd be surprised what your hands can do. That night, as I sat back at the kitchen table, I looked down at the lunch pail and noticed something new. Dust had started to collect on it again. I wiped it off without thinking. Then I stopped. I opened it. Inside, the documents were gone, stored away now, but the letter to my daughter was still there. Unread. Untouched. Next to it was the old photo of Marjorie, finally pressed flat between two thin sheets of wax paper I'd found in her baking drawer. The corners no longer curled. It looked permanent now. Just as I was about to close the lid, I heard a knock at the door. A young woman stood there. Reporter badge, notepad in hand. Nervous smile. "Mr. Ellison?" she asked. "Is it true you cut your daughter out of the will and turned your home into a school of some kind?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I motioned toward the lunch pail on the table. "You want to know the story?" I said. "It's all in there." She blinked, confused. But then her eyes followed mine to the dented, polished metal. I closed the lid slowly and slid the reporter's card under it, letting just the corner stick out, a future waiting to be written. If hands could build steel, they could rebuild a home. That thought came to me one morning as I watched the sun climb over the rooftops, casting a warm glow on the porch boards I'd repaired more times than I could count. The same porch where I used to wait for Marjorie, for my daughter, for a version of the future that no longer existed. But maybe something new could be built in its place. The boy from my cousin's side came back a few days later. Said he liked working with tools. Said he'd never used a hammer before, but the feeling of hitting something and making it stay fixed, that was new to him. I showed him how to change out a doorknob. Then a light fixture. Then patch a bit of drywall. Each time, his confidence grew. And with it, something inside me stirred. The house felt less like a graveyard and more like a workshop. I made a call to Pastor Jim, a friend of Marjorie's from her church days. He had always spoken kindly of my work ethic, even when others gossiped. When I explained what I had in mind, he didn't hesitate. "Let's do it," he said. "We've got kids. Boys. Girls. Young folks who don't know how to turn a screwdriver. They need hands-on guidance. You've got the tools, and the patience." Next came Mary Lou, the school counselor. She came by with files in hand and fire in her voice. "These kids are drowning in test scores and tablets," she said. "They need something real. Something they can feel in their hands." I led them into the garage. Showed them the shelves lined with tools, labeled and cleaned, many unused since the mill closed. Their eyes lit up. The very next week, we started small, just a few kids after school, 2 evenings a week. I cleared out the back room, scrubbed the floors, fixed the lighting. The lunch pail now sat on a shelf near the entry, not as a memory, but as a holder for intake forms and safety waivers. One boy, maybe 14, stared at the pail for a long time. "Is that yours?" he asked. "Used to be," I said. "Now it belongs to this house." We didn't call it a school. It wasn't fancy. But word spread fast. Within 2 weeks, we had 12 kids and a wait list. Some from troubled homes, some just bored, some with no fathers at all. And each evening, they showed up, sleeves rolled, eyes curious, hands awkward but willing. We started with basics: how to measure twice and cut once, how to change a tire, how to unclog a drain without calling for help. I taught them like I had taught my daughter once. Patient. Gentle. Steady. And in return, they brought laughter back into this house. One night, I overheard one of them whisper, "He treats us like we matter." I stood in the hallway, out of sight, my hand resting on the lunch pail, and I let the tears come. That weekend, Frank helped me paint the front porch. We added a sign, "Marjorie's House, Hands-on Learning for Hardworking Futures." It wasn't official yet, not on paper, but it was real. More real than anything I'd built in years. The reporter came back. This time, not for gossip, but a story. A real one. She took photos, of the tools, the kids, the sign. She asked questions about Marjorie, about my work, about the will. I didn't answer everything. But I showed her the lunch pail. Told her what it once meant, what it had carried, and what it now held. She snapped a picture of it, sitting next to a stack of intake forms, a pair of gloves tucked inside, the seal from the lawyer still hidden beneath the lid. That photo ended up on the local paper's front page. "Steel hands, soft heart, father builds second chance for the forgotten." The town's response surprised me. Donations came in. Volunteers too, some retirees from the mill, some young folks wanting to learn. Even a few who had once whispered behind my back showed up, eyes downcast, asking how they could help. I didn't turn anyone away. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it for purpose. For peace. That night, I sat on the porch with my coffee and looked out at the kids still packing up from the day's lessons. One of them turned back and said, "Thanks, Mr. E. This place feels like home." I nodded but didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice. Pastor Jim leaned against the railing beside me and said, "We could open by fall, if you're ready." I looked down at the lunch pail beside my chair. It had once carried a man's survival. Now it carried a community's beginning. Laughter returned to the house, not from blood, but from backbone. It started subtly. The way the boys stomped their boots outside before coming in, just like I used to. The way one of the girls wiped her hands on her jeans and said, "Sorry, I don't do dainty." They weren't just learning skills. They were becoming something. A team. A tribe. And me? I wasn't just a man with a pail anymore. I was Mr. E, the guy who made them feel capable when the rest of the world wrote them off. One evening, I found myself sitting on the back steps, watching a few of them help each other rewire an old lamp. The porch light above buzzed faintly as the sun dropped behind the neighbor's fence. I glanced at the steel lunch pail sitting near the door, now with a laminated label taped across its front. Donations, Marjorie's house. One of the apprentices, a quiet teen named Louise, slipped a folded $5 bill inside and whispered, "For your wife." That moment nearly undid me. Inside the house, things were changing fast. The storage room was now a tool shed. The old dining room had become a workbench station. Photos of each apprentice were pinned along the hallway wall, beneath a hand-painted sign that read, "Built by hands, bound by heart." Not one of those kids shared my blood. But every one of them had earned my trust. And then, she came back. I saw the car first. Parked across the street, windows up, engine idling. She didn't come to the door. Not the first day. Or the second. On the third day, I caught her watching from the driver's seat as we loaded broken chairs into the truck for a restoration project. I didn't wave. But I didn't look away either. Later that evening, I found her name on a donation envelope left on the porch. No note. No return address. Just $100 in small bills. She wasn't ready to face me. But something in her had shifted. A week later, she texted, "Dad, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time before setting it down. I didn't reply. Not out of spite. But because I needed her to decide, was she coming back for me, or for what she thought she lost? Meanwhile, the kids kept showing up. One had dropped out of school but now arrived every afternoon like clockwork. Another, who barely spoke at first, now led group projects and corrected measurements with precision. They filled this place with something I hadn't heard in years, respect without guilt. Then came the call from the county. A small grant had been approved based on the newspaper feature. Enough to renovate the garage fully, upgrade tools, and buy protective gear. When the inspector came by for the assessment, he stood in the doorway and looked around. "You sure this is all being run by one guy?" I laughed. "No. This is being run by 27 kids who needed a reason to believe in themselves." I just opened the door. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself. The lines. The scar. The same jacket. The same hands. But I didn't see embarrassment anymore. I saw a man who had built something better than a house. He'd built a home. Later, I walked down to the lunch pail at the door. It was half full now, not just with bills and envelopes, but with folded notes, thank yous, even a few sketches of future projects. I opened the lid and placed the photo of Marjorie back inside, now laminated and clean. I whispered, "They know your name now. They say it with respect." The porch light flickered, then held steady. That night, I stepped outside for air and saw her car again. This time, she was standing next to it. No makeup. No dress. Just her, my daughter, holding one of the flyers for Marjorie's house in her hand. She looked at the building, then at me. And for the first time in years, her eyes didn't hold shame. They held something far more dangerous. Regret. Her knock sounded like rain asking permission. I opened the door slowly. She stood there in a gray sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back the way she used to wear it when she was little. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her fingers gripped the flyer for Marjorie's house like it might blow away if she let go. "Hi, Dad," she said. I nodded once and stepped aside. She entered cautiously, eyes scanning the hallway like a guest, not a daughter. The laughter of apprentices echoed faintly from the back rooms, hammers tapping, someone yelling for duct tape. But in this space, it was quiet. She looked at the photos pinned on the wall, not family photos, but faces of young men and women learning to hold drills, paint fences, fix what others had thrown away. "You built all this?" she asked softly. "With help," I said. She turned to me, her mouth opening, then closing. For once, she didn't know how to spin it, didn't have a line ready. She looked tired, like someone who'd run out of mirrors and only just found the truth. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "I came because I've been wrong. For a long time." I didn't reply. She swallowed hard. "I thought if I could just have the right wedding, the right image, the right life, I could fix everything. But all I did was break it worse." She moved to the dining table and ran her hand over the worn wood. Her fingers stopped near the lunch pail, still there, still polished, now holding forms and thank you notes instead of meals. "You brought this to the wedding," she whispered, almost smiling. "I never thought I'd see it again." "It was never for show," I said. "That pail fed us. It paid your tuition. It carried your drawings. You just forgot." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I did. I forgot everything that mattered." There was silence between us. Not cold, just full. Finally, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Is it true you changed the will?" I didn't move. "Is it true I'm out of everything?" I walked to the pail, opened the lid, and pulled out the letter I had written all those weeks ago. The one tucked beneath the thermos, waiting. I handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it in both hands. Her eyes scanned the page slowly. I watched her shoulders tense, then shake, her breath catching at the final lines. When she looked up, her face was wet with tears. "You said you still love me," she whispered. "I do," I replied. "But love doesn't mean silence. And it doesn't mean surrender." She folded the letter back with care. Her voice was small. "Is there anything I can do to be part of this again?" I looked at her long and hard. The girl I raised was still in there somewhere, under all the polish and shame. But trust wasn't something I could rebuild in a day. "You can show up," I said. "Help. Listen. Respect the name on the door." She nodded quickly. "I will. I promise. But you won't get the house. Or the money," I added. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. That part settled. That was the cost. She didn't flinch. In fact, she nodded. "I understand." Then, quietly, she looked around one more time. "I don't deserve to call this home." "No," I said gently. "But maybe one day, you'll help build someone else's." As she turned to leave, she paused beside the lunch pail. "Can I put something in?" she asked. I raised an eyebrow. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded crayon drawing, one she'd found in a box of old school things. It was us. Me with the pail. Her on my shoulders. She tucked it inside, just beneath the thermos, right where her childhood notes used to go. Then she walked out the door. Would you have forgiven her, or shut the door forever? Tell us in the comments. That evening, as I locked up the house, a certified envelope slid through the mail slot. I bent down, opened it, and saw the heading. Notice of probate filing, will contest. My daughter had visited. But not alone. If they wanted judgment, I wanted witnesses. The courtroom was small, old wood, and too many eyes. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, creaking with each rotation. My daughter sat 2 benches away, her lawyer whispering rapidly. She didn't meet my gaze. She didn't need to. She already knew she'd lost me. Now she was trying not to lose what was left. The judge, an older woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a voice that carried weight, shuffled through the stack of papers in front of her. The recording had already been played, not the whole thing, just enough. Just enough to show motive. Just enough to prove that this wasn't about grief or confusion. It was about entitlement. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle of a legal pad. Then the judge looked up. Mr. Ellison's will is clear. It includes a no contest clause. The recordings and signed affidavit support his claim of undue pressure. The scholarship trust is valid and active. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. This court will not reward disrespect. A beat passed. Then her gavel came down with a soft but final thud. Case closed. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors. Reporters. Some of the kids from Marjorie's house. The newspaper photographer raised her lens again. I didn't pose. I just walked down the courthouse steps with the steel lunch pail swinging at my side. It wasn't heavy anymore. It hadn't carried meals in years, but it had carried me. Through humiliation. Through grief. Through war without weapons. That night, we held a small gathering at Marjorie's house. Parents, volunteers, apprentices. Nothing formal. Just lemonade and folding chairs in the backyard under the porch lights. Pastor Jim spoke first. Then Mary Lou. Then one of the kids, Luis, the same one who dropped $5 into the pail weeks earlier. He cleared his throat and looked at me. This place saved me, he said simply. He didn't ask where I came from. He just showed me what my hands could do. Applause followed. Not loud. But sincere. Then it was my turn. I didn't give a speech. I just walked over to the newly built display cabinet by the front door. Inside was a small spotlight. Beneath it, a glass box. I opened the lunch pail one final time. Inside were 4 things. The crayon drawing of my daughter riding on my shoulders. Marjorie's photo, laminated and steady. The $5 bill, still folded. And the notary seal. I placed it gently inside the case. The lid faced upward. The dents still visible. I closed the cabinet. A brass plaque had been screwed into the wood above it. This fed more than mouths. It fed dignity. As people filtered out that night, they paused to read the plaque. Some touched the glass. A few wiped their eyes. My daughter didn't come. But I saw her name on the next week's donor list. Anonymous, but I knew. And that was enough. The house didn't feel quiet anymore. It breathed, just like Marjorie did in every corner, in every screw turned, every blueprint sketched, every kid who looked at a hammer like it might change their life. They called me Mr. E. They didn't ask about my scars or my past. They didn't flinch at my clothes. They saw a man who still had something left to give. Not for inheritance. Not for show. But for purpose. I stood on the porch as the last car pulled away. The wind stirred the chimes Marjorie once picked out from the hardware store. They sang like old voices. And I whispered to her, just once. They know your name now. They say it with pride. The dents in the lunch pail shone back at me, proof of a life that fed more than mouths, it fed dignity.